This is Kathy Beal of EmpowermentUnlimited.net with a short follow-up to my video, Good Trouble, The Next Generation. The first one, the one that's already up, looked at the chart of Justin Jones, who was expelled from the Tennessee legislature for leading a protest against gun violence. And now I am looking at the chart of Justin Pearson, who was the other representative who was expelled. This chart, like Justin Jones's, has a lot of cardinal energy in it. He is a Capricorn sun, and he has a visionary change maker signature, just as Justin Jones does, with Neptune and Uranus conjunct near the end of Capricorn. This makes him extremely goal-oriented and willing to work, long-term plans, working toward them. This is, I have seen the top of the mountain and I am going to walk to it territory. We'll come back to some of this in a minute. I should point out that this is a solar chart, which puts his sun on the ascendant because I don't have a birth time. So let's look at his emotional driver, the moon down there in the third house in Aries. At any point during the day, the moon was in Aries. It was at the very first gasp of it at midnight, early in the morning. So it's in this sign, whether that degree is correct or not. So his emotional driver is he is a fighter, and it's in the solar house of communication. This gives an impulsiveness, an impetuousness, a fearlessness. This is where's the fire behavior. And I have seen a man with a Capricorn sun and an Aries moon dive into and handle situations that were not at all in his sphere of responsibility. So this person is just wired to fight, to take care of things with an incredible maturity. This is the chart. I don't know anything about his background, but this is the chart of a person who takes on paternal responsibilities at an extremely early age. It's just what he's wired to do. His value system, Venus in Sagittarius, conjunct Jupiter in its home sign of Sagittarius, in the 11th house, which is group associations, it's the collective, and it's also long-term wishes, in the sign having to do with life philosophy, with legislation and the legislature. And this is in a, at least by sign, it's in a trine with that moon. And he is wired to fight for his beliefs, and those beliefs are expansive and exuberant. He sees the potential, he sees the highest possibilities. And this little configuration is in a stressful aspect to Mars, how he uses his energy. Interestingly, this Mars is on Justin Jones's sun, so they work together as fighters. They keep each other going. And note that there is a wide configuration here called a T-square, which has Mars on one end, how he uses his drive. He really can go for the details, and fight to better situations. And that's opposed to Saturn in Pisces, which brings the collective experience, possibly religiosity, into his value system and what he's good at. This is kind of a preacher type fervor, and both of those push against that configuration of expansive Jupiter and Venus up there in the 11th. So he is forced. He goes against authority. He points out things that could be better, and this propels him toward living out his beliefs, which we saw happening. It's also worth noting his North Node, the path that he is moving toward at 11 degrees Scorpio in the 10th house of public life. This is a profound and intense and impactful position. He is supposed to do things that bring deep level evolutionary change to the fore. Now, back to his similarities with his fellow legislator who was knocked out. They both have suns in earth signs, so they're both very grounded individuals, or at least they have the potential to be. They both have a visionary change agent signature of Neptune conjunct Uranus, which could also be using a religious tint, bringing a religious tint to their disruptive change agent ways. And they both have Saturn in Pisces, meaning that each of them is heading towards the Saturn return. Justin Pearson is going to hit his first Saturn this year, moving through his second house of values and also his talents and abilities. So his Saturn return is ramping up right now. Saturn is not going to reach his natal Saturn until early next year, which is when we start to see the foundations locking in for what will carry him through the next 30 years. When Saturn changes signs, as it did at the beginning of March, it can bring a shift in focus. It can bring delays. It can bring impediments. He got an impediment. He has been booted from his position. There's some question about whether he is going to get it back. As I record this, there is talk of reappointing him to the position that he was expelled from. And there is talk of retaliation for Memphis to affect the funding of, I believe, schools if he's put back in. Let's look at what else is going on with him right now. Uranus in the sky is just about to enter his house of creative self-expression, also rules children. Uranus is making an exact trine to his sun. This is something that was in place at the election that put him in this position. In November, Uranus was retrograde at that time. Now that it is direct and is back at that same degree, bam, he gets booted from the position, but we'll see if that lasts or not. Regardless, his role as change agent has really been shaken up, and his visibility has very suddenly been changed. Some more that's going to happen from that, interestingly, Uranus has been a big factor in eclipses that have been going on the last 2 years that have been going in the signs of Taurus and Scorpio, largely across the houses in his chart that represent his place in the world. The 4th house, his home; the 10th house, his career and his public reputation. The May lunar eclipse is going to be up here in his 10th house, wrapping up a cycle, wrapping up, perhaps reversing or solidifying, codifying in a way, his election to this seat, and it's going to be pretty close to his North Node. So there is a change coming in how he expresses his path out in the public. Interestingly, then, actually before that, the April 19 solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Aries happens in his career house, and it is in an uncomfortable aspect to his natal Pluto called a semi-sextile, which nudges him out of his comfort territory and pushes him into a more evolved expression of his role, his public life, and also power. With that Pluto in the 11th house, especially at the very last degree of Scorpio, he is wired to work with power, deep power, power involving deathly things in a group situation to address deep, hidden, and entrenched power in the legislature. And do note, which I failed to mention earlier, that Pluto is right next to, it's an out of sign conjunction to that Venus. Do not underestimate this man's power, his tenacity, and his ability to keep at it. Now, going back to what's happening with Uranus and the changes that it has brought, first putting him into office and then taking him out of office. In June, Mars is going to be stirring up issues having to do with what his role in the world is. In early June, that might be when he's put back in. That might be when the next stage becomes apparent of what his path is and how he's going to move forward. There could be an open enemy that does something. There could be an outer motivation for this action, and it might be him simply expressing himself. So that is something to watch. What bodes well for him for the next 21 years is what's going on with Pluto. At the end of March, Pluto moved to 0 degrees Aquarius, approaching almost on his planet of communication, Mercury. He sees the big picture. He sees ramifications. He thinks in terms of the collective. This is another way of being a visionary. This is an ability to speak to large groups of people. Pluto on that is adding a terrific sense of passion and almost like life or death panic to it, but it's giving him the ability to speak up in a way that he hasn't. It's really amplifying his voice in a huge, huge way. And as it does that, it's in an opportunity aspect to that Pluto and Venus up there in the 11th house. He has the mic now to speak to power, to address his philosophical points of view, his political vision, and a vision in a huge way. Right now, it is involving the issue of gun control. Probably a lot more will be involved with it. One more factor about this, and then I'll talk about why this is so important. At the same time, this is pulling in his Mars in Virgo in the Pluto house of secrets, dark money, death. Pluto is in an adjustment aspect to that Mars, requiring, forcing, bringing out a change in how he goes about pushing his agenda forward, how he uses his talents and abilities, how he pushes himself out in the world. I would say being thrust into the national spotlight is a huge adjustment. Pluto's very extreme. This is going to happen again and again and again because Pluto is going to sit at this spot until June 11th, and then it's going to back off. Late in January next year, Pluto is going to return to this spot, and next year it's actually going to cross. It's going to meet his Mercury, and then it's going to back off again. And then at the end of 2024, it will enter Aquarius for a long 2-decade tour of the sign. This man's career is just beginning. His work on a national level is just beginning. It will be very unusual if he stays in the State House with this kind of impulse behind him, with this kind of force propelling him on his mission. It would be consistent for him to end up on the national stage with a job on the national stage. it would be consistent with this chart for him to end up in Congress because his energies and wiring are so weighted toward legislative action, working in a legislative deliberative body. He's not stopping. Whether he gets back into the legislature or not, I doubt he'll stay there for long. And I know in my bones that he is a force driving change in this country for the next couple of decades. And he is allied. He will remain allied somehow with Justin Jones because of the contacts between their charts.